Last year, 3 of my family members were gruesomely murdered in a hate crime. It goes without saying that it's really difficult for me to be here today. But my brother Dia, his wife Yusur, and her sister Razan don't give me much of a choice. I'm hopeful that by the end of this talk, you will make a choice and join me in standing up against hate. My little brother, a basketball-obsessed kid, had become and transformed into an accomplished young man. He was at the top of his dental school class, and alongside Yusur and Razan was involved in local and international community service projects dedicated to the homeless and refugees, including a dental relief trip they were planning for Syrian refugees in Turkey. Razan, at just 19, used her creativity as an architectural engineering student to serve those around her, making care packages for the local homeless, among other projects. That is who they were. Later, I'm on call at San Francisco General Hospital when I receive a barrage of vague text messages expressing condolences. Confused, I call my father, who calmly intones, "There's been a shooting in Dia's neighborhood in Chapel Hill. It's on lockdown, that's all we know." I hang up and quickly Google shooting in Chapel Hill. One hit comes up, quote, "3 people were shot in the back of the head and confirmed dead on the scene." Something in me just knows. I fling out of my chair and faint onto the gritty hospital floor, wailing. Dia had just gotten off the bus from class. Razan was visiting for dinner, already at home with Yusur. As they began to eat, they heard a knock on the door. When Dia opened it, their neighbor proceeded to fire multiple shots at him. According to 911 calls, the girls were heard screaming. The man turned towards the kitchen and fired a single shot into Yusur's hip, immobilizing her. He then approached her from behind, pressed the barrel of his gun against her head, and with a single bullet lacerated her midbrain. He then turned towards Razan, who was screaming for her life in execution style with a single bullet to the back of the head, killed her. On his way out, he shot Dia one last time, a bullet in the mouth, for a total of 8 bullets, 2 lodged in the head, 2 in his chest, and the rest in his extremities. Dia, Yusur, and Razan were executed in a place that was meant to be safe, their home. For months, this man had been harassing them, knocking on their door, brandishing his gun on a couple of occasions. His Facebook was cluttered with anti-religion posts. Yusur felt particularly threatened by him. As she was moving in, he told Yusur and her mom that he didn't like the way they looked. In response, Yusur's mom told her to be kind to her neighbor, that as he got to know them, he'd see them for who they were. I guess we've all become so numb to the hatred that we couldn't have ever imagined it turning into fatal violence. The man who murdered my brother turned himself into the police shortly after the murders, saying he killed 3 kids, execution style, over a parking dispute. The police issued a premature public statement that morning echoing his claims without bothering to question it or further investigate. It turns out there was no parking dispute, there was no argument, no violation. But the damage was already done. In a 24-hour media cycle, the words parking dispute had already become the go-to soundbite. They were murdered by their neighbor because of their faith, because of a piece of cloth they chose to don on their heads, because they were visibly Muslim. Some of the rage I felt at the time was that if roles were reversed, and an Arab, Muslim, or Muslim-appearing person had killed 3 white American college students, execution style, in their home, what would we have called it? A terrorist attack. When white men commit acts of violence in the US, they're lone wolves, mentally ill, or driven by a parking dispute. A couple of hours later, in the midst of a chaotic house overflowing with friends and family, our neighbor Neil comes over, sits down next to my parents, and asks, "What can I do?" Neil had over 2 decades of experience in journalism, but he makes it clear that he's not there in his capacity as a journalist, but as a neighbor who wants to help. I ask him what he thinks we should do given the bombardment of local media interview requests. He offers to set up a press conference at a local community center. Even now, I don't have the words to thank him. Just tell me when and I'll have all the news channels present, he said. The following day, major newspapers, including the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, published stories about Dia, Yusur, and Razan, allowing us to reclaim the narrative and call attention to the mainstreaming of anti-Muslim hatred.